questions. Okay. As I was mentioning, can everybody see this okay? Well, I guess you do. If not, then let me know. But I spent 27 years in Saudi Arabia. And through my efforts and the efforts of a lot of other people there, Mormons, non-Mormons, Arabs, Muslims, were able to do a lot of research. We actually had the advantage of being there. So the first book, as mentioned, was Lehi in the Wilderness, 81 New Documented Evidence that the Book of Mormon is a true history. And so we spent 5 years basically going down the frankincense trail. Now, why the frankincense trail? It's the only trail that existed in Arabia, through Arabia at that time. There wasn't a trail down the shoreline or any other trail in Western Arabia till 1100 AD. And the problem is you need water to cross Arabia. Arabia is a desert, and it's the size of Europe. You have to have water sources. And that was the only trail that had any water in it. So that was specifically all about just Lehi's Trail in the Wilderness. Then we wrote the Voyages of the Book of Mormon with 2 sea captains. Each of those guys were captains in the merchant marines. Each of them had sailed over 1 million miles. Both of them competitive sailors, by the way. And so I know nothing about boats, okay? When I was a sea explorer, they tried to get me to learn how to sail a dinghy, and I kept flipping it over. So they finally pulled me out of the water and said, look, here's your merit badge. You know, you're gonna kill yourself, right? So with the help of these guys, and they had some very sophisticated software, we were able to track possible routes. And they're both historians as well, so they knew about ancient ship construction. It was a very interesting book. And then this last book that I wrote came out just a couple months ago, Discovering the Amazing Jaredites. Half that takes place in the old world, about half of it takes place in the new world. Now, in the new world, I believe, and I think archaeology is proving this now, that there is not this great separation between North and South America. The Americas, people were trading back and forth. They're intermixing. So if you're going to find Hebrew DNA, it's going to be all over the place sooner or later. That's what I think is going to be happening. And then what happened here is that after I got published a few times, I told the people at BYU, look, I'm going to write about Peru. I served a mission down there. I saw some incredible things. I learned a lot of incredible things down there that are parallels to the Book of Mormon. So I wrote Nephi in the Promised Land, put forth a proposition that perhaps the Book of Mormon took place down in Peru. So that was my 4th book. Each of the books contain a lot of, well, the first 3, over 700 academic, non-LDS, non-Mormon references from archaeologists and et cetera. The latest book only has about 250 references in it. Now, why is Arabia significant? Well, the critics have us pinned down. You know, if they want to criticize the heartland theory, all we got to do is say, oh, well, it could have taken place in Mesoamerica. If they criticize Mesoamerica, maybe it took place in Peru. If they criticize Peru, maybe it took place in California. You know, we can shift on them, right? But Arabia, they have us pinned down. They went 3 days into the desert, into the wilderness, which means desert in the old world. Then they traveled southeast. They had to be in Saudi Arabia. They had to go all the way through Arabia. So they have us pinned down there. Also, they claim that the Book of Mormon has some unreasonable statements about Arabia. And of course, this just proves that Joseph Smith was inspired, because the things they criticize are actually there. So for example, a firm, steadfast, and immovable valley, 3 days travel into the wilderness. And that valley contains a continuously flowing river. Most fertile parts on a barren trail. Saudi Arabia is a desert. Why are they talking about fertile parts? Fruitful area on the Indian Ocean where they built their ship. Well, I'll just show you. This is 3 days into the wilderness. And what you have here on a camel's track, you have a river that flows through an amazing canyon, and that river has been flowing for the last 27 years. I've been there dozens of times. It's spectacular. Here it would be a national park. It is beautiful, firm, steadfast, and immovable. This is about 11 miles from the Frankincense Trail. What do you find at the other end of the Frankincense Trail? You find the Frankincense Harbor, where they're building ships back to 3000 BC. You see my truck there, that's the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia. That's a desert, a sand desert larger than Kansas, larger than Utah. Nothing but sand. An hour away, you come to the harbor, fruit trees. You have my friend Ali sitting in the upper valley from the harbor where there's 5 freshwater lakes. All the resources you need to build a ship. Explain why they had to go through the terrible desert for 8 years. So you have at each end of the trail, if you just look at the trail itself, they came south-southeast. You have the Valley of Lemuel. You have Shazer. I have a map in my office which has Shazer still on it. It's one of the first, actually it's the second halt on the Frankincense Trail, southeast of the Valley of Lemuel, which we think is the Valley of Lemuel. So there's actual Shazer. There's a map with the name Shazer on it. It's still there, the map from the 19th century. The part of the trail that runs from Dedan, today's Ula, down to Medina in Saudi Arabia, there's 12 villages. They were called the Mushaharin, all the way back to Ramesses II. If you go to Nigel Groom's Dictionary of Arabic Topography and Place Names, Mushaharin actually translates to fertile parts. He says fertile pieces, but pieces and parts are the same. This is a Oxford scholar, okay? That part of the trail was actually called the fertile parts. Nephi leaves Shazer, and he says we went several days, and then we came many days, and we came to the fertile parts. Following the trail south-southeast, you come down here. This is the only place in Arabia where it gets very, very dry. You're right next to the empty quarter. Nephi says they broke their arrow. They had to go up into the mountains to find game. Exactly fits where we are. Eventually, they get to Nahom. There's at least 5 different places we found with the name, tribes and cities, whatever name, Nahum. In Arabic, you can interchange vowels, okay? They only write consonants. So when Europeans write it, they don't know what to put in there. They just put in some vowels. From there, the Frankincense Trail turned east, just like it states in the Book of Mormon, and you come to the Frankincense Harbor. That harbor, many biblical scholars believe, is the harbor of Ophir, including Nigel Groom, who's the expert on the Frankincense Trail. Now, I have a friend, Ali. If you come with me next year, hopefully I'm going to go back to Oman. I'll take you to Ali. He's a local sheikh. He's an historian. He's written 13 books on the local history. In those books, he has his genealogy. His genealogy goes back to the man Ophir. He says this harbor is actually named Ophir. It's his family's harbor. Now, why is that interesting? If you go to the Smith's Bible Dictionary, you'll find that Ophir translates to abundance. Put abundance in your thesaurus and see what it says, bountiful. If you go to Hitchcock's Dictionary of Biblical Place Names and you put in Ophir, and you'll find it means a fruitful region, okay? Believe me, you come with me to Arabia, everything is there that's in the Book of Mormon, everything, dating back to the Pacific time that's written about. So, where did Lehi's family go? Well, some people might disagree with me, but we don't know with any significant degree of certainty exactly where they went. Now, many people are very passionate about a certain theory about where they went, where they settled. Some will even go out and claim that they know where it took place. But, in reality, there's no scholastic level evidence that shows where the Book of Mormon took place in the Americas. You might believe it, and you might have some other reason for believing it, but there's no credible evidence at this point. That's what we have to establish. And so if we don't know, why consider ancient Peru? Okay, I mean, I'm coming up with a theory that's, some people have written before me about it, but why should we consider Peru? Well, I'm just going to present some ideas for you tonight to consider why you should consider Peru as a possibility for the Book of Mormon having taken place. Okay, it's reported that Joseph Smith taught that Lehi landed in the continent of South America in Chile, 30 degrees south latitude. Now, the people who taught that knew Joseph Smith, and they were taught that that was his revelation he received. In the LDS Book of Mormon, in the 1879 edition, it was even footnoted that it was in Chile. So from the Utah group, some people will disagree today, okay? But the early LDS leaders in Utah taught that Book of Mormon took place in South America. Now, that again there's other statements by Joseph Smith that contradict that. So, that's an idea. But what would be the basis for that kind of a theory that they took place in Peru? I'd like to have you consider the oral traditions that were well documented by the Spanish chroniclers, the archaeological evidence, and the geography of the area. Okay, if you go down, any school child in Peru can tell you the oral traditions of the Incas. The Incas believed that the first Incas were 4 brothers who came by sea. The youngest was the leader and became the king. He worked in gold and silver, and they had gold and silver in abundance down there. Taught the people a new religion, built a temple. By the way, he wouldn't let any of the locals do it. It had to be his own family. Taught people how to build homes and to farm. He was loved by his people, led his people in war, taught how to make weapons. He was given the right to rule by God, okay? God had given him, Viracocha, the right to rule over his people. He had a staff, a royal staff, which was handed to him by his father. And that staff was called the Nephi. Now, in Spanish, Nephi is Nephi. In Arabic, it's also Nephi, Semitic language. The 4th brother had to separate from his violent older brother. And this is one of the greatest events in the history of the Andean people, is the separation of the younger brother from his older brothers. The younger brother then went and looked for fertile land. But that was after they lived on an island, the island of the sun in Lake Titicaca. Okay, so eventually they go to the Cusco Valley. The youngest brother then makes 2 gold plates. Now, of course, the Book of Mormon is 2 sets of plates, but their tradition is that he made 2 plates. He put 1 plate on his chest and the other plate on his back. He stood on the edge of the Cusco Valley, and when the sun hit those gold plates, it told the people that God had chosen him to be their king. He taught the natives how to grow corn. Now, if you carbon date corn agriculture in the Cusco Valley is carbon dated to circa 550 BC, plus or minus 50 years. Now, what's interesting is that in 2018, a group of scientists from a university in Cusco, plus some international scientists as well, they went back and they took a sample of the DNA from the different descendants of the royal Inca family. And they concluded that the DNA supports the legend that there are four brothers that came out at a certain particular time in their early history. So that's just a new DNA study that came out, and you guys can have a copy of this when you're done if you want. But that's the source of it, confirming that they came back, that the actual Inca ruling family came back from a very narrow set. But the actual title of it is DNA Supports the Legend of the Four Brothers. How about their belief in a white god, Viracocha? Well, the Peruvian, the Andean belief in the staff god or the white god Viracocha, Viracocha meaning white god, dates back to the late second millennium BC. They have artifacts that show the white god. It's the earliest evidence of any belief in a white god in all the Americas. Now we know the Jaredites believed in the white god as well, of course. The white god visited the Andean people dressed in a white robe and sandals. When they first, in the Spanish chronicles, they believed it was St. Thomas. Okay, that's what they thought the Incas were talking about. Their white god healed their sick, taught the people to love one another, called disciples, and traveled the country with them, converting the people. When he finally left them in Ecuador, walking out on the sea, promising to return. He raised their dead. He forgave them of their sins. He wept for them. Now that's very interesting because we know in the Book of Mormon that the Lord wept for his people. And in antiquity, it's kind of hard to find people who believed in a God who would actually cry and had those kind of emotions. But their white God wept for them. He promised to return. Okay. Other pre-Columbian legends. Now there's the legend of the Great Flood. Now we don't know if that was inspired by the Spanish padres teaching the Indians. But we know a lot of the so-called lores that relate to the Bible could have been influenced through the different American people by the Spanish padres. They believe that the world is divided into 1,000-year dispensations. They believe in a fair and dark-skinned two nations. These two groups hate each other. The two groups were divided by the East Sea, which is Lake Titicaca, in my theory. If you go to Lake Titicaca, one side of the lake, the southern side is in Bolivia. They speak Aymaran. They hate the taller, fair-skinned people, Quechua people on the north side of the lake to this day. Their kingdom was divided into four quarters, like in the Book of Mormon. Dark-skinned people killed off the fair-skinned people. They believed a later fair-skinned people would come and destroy their kingdom. It's very interesting, the fact that, if you go down to Peru today, they'll say, oh, the Incas believed in the sun god. Well, they didn't believe in the sun god. They believed in Viracocha, up to the grandfather of Atahualpa, Atahualpa being the Inca wannabe, who the Spanish, when the Spanish arrived, he was an Inca wannabe. And he was the one that was captured, and they put him in a room. And he said, I'll fill this room full of gold, if you'll set me free. Anyway, his great-grandfather had a visitation by the white god. And this is well documented by the historians. And this visitation of the Inca by the white god was quite stunning, because this Inca had decided he had captured a tribe of people, and to unify the kingdom, he said, well, we'll take your son, God, and we'll make him the God of our area, of our empire. And so he's visited by the white god, who told him, because you have done this, your son will be the last Inca. There'll never be an Inca after him. And fair-skinned people will come and they will destroy you. Now, his son, Juarez, he ruled, but he died from smallpox before the Spanish arrived. And so did his son, the crown prince, died from smallpox. Well, when Pizarro arrived, there were two brothers who were fighting for the kingdom to see who could be the king or the Inca. And so what happened was the Atahualpa was kind of the stronger one. He had the army. He was headed from Ecuador down to Cusco to defeat his stepbrother to become the king. And he got to a place called Cajamarca. And at Cajamarca, there was a shrine there to the white god, Viracocha. And so he stopped and he said, I want to make a sacrifice to Viracocha. And the shrine is up on a hill. And so what happened was he sent somebody up to the top of the hill to sacrifice a sheep, unspotted sheep, which they did. And the priest refused to do it. He says, you're mean, you're torturing the people, you're trying to kill your brother. Viracocha will not accept this. So the Inca, this Atahualpa got upset. He went up the hill, took a battle axe, chopped off the head of a statue of Viracocha, which is of a man, then killed the priest. When he came down from the hill, a messenger arrived who said, Viracocha's white men have arrived. And from that time on, he realized that they were doomed. These were the people that Viracocha had promised would come that would harm them. And then later, in the same visitation, the white god had told the Inca that later other white people would come who would bless the people. So these are some of the oral traditions. Now, looking at the archaeology, what are the characteristics of the Nephite civilization? And where did such things exist in the Americas during Book of Mormon times? Well, there are 4 empires that are of interest to us in this regard. You have Corral, which is an hour north of Lima. And Corral dates from 2700 to 300 BC, the coastal empire there, of that civilization. And now that's the only civilization in all the Americas that dates back to the early Jaredite time. If you're looking at the Olmecs, they're 1300 BC at the earliest. So any significant buildings or structures. So it's the only civilization that really matches Jaredite period. You have in the central Andes, Cusco, that civilization went from around 600 BC to 200 AD. In my books, I propose that that's the land of Nephi. You have the northern Lake Titicaca upper basin, which I believe would be a good candidate for Zarahemla, 500 BC to 400 AD. And then you have the early Tiwanaku mid-formative period. That goes from 600 BC to 400 AD. Again, that would be Lamanite territory. So those are 4 interesting civilizations that we need to study more about. Okay, Moroni had prepared his people with breastplates and with arm shields, yea, and also shields to defend their heads, and also they were dressed with thick clothing. Now, the Lamanite army fought naked with just no shields whatsoever. This is a pot that's from Nazca, Peru. You see here you have fair-skinned warrior fighting a darker-skinned warrior. The fair-skinned warrior is wearing a head helmet or shield to protect his head and wearing thick clothing to protect his body. The dark-skinned ones are naked. You have the same situation over here in this pot. Now, I showed this at a presentation, this next slide, and people started laughing. They said, who brought out the filt pen? But again, this is another pot from Nazca. You have the fair-skinned, dark-skinned people, and you have the facial hair on the fair-skinned guy. But I agree, it looks like someone just took a pen and drew that in. Okay, the Nephites had a gold plates library. They had a language that had Semitic roots to it, and all the records were lost any written records in the Book of Mormon were lost. So I don't have here in my book, Nephi and the Promised Land, I talk about the Semitic influences, the professors, non-LDS, who believe the Quechua language is very much, has the same structure and some of the same type of words that you'd have in Hebrew. As far as gold plates, this gold plate dates back 1900 BC. The Peruvians were equal masters to the Egyptians in their use of gold, silver, copper alloys. They were master in their use of metalworks. This is gold plate dating back to Book of Mormon times and actually earlier. These are chasquis. They, one of the criticisms of the Peru model is that they don't have a written language. Like I said, the Book of Mormon says that all written languages will be destroyed except those which are on the plates. These chasquis are what they use to record information, and these date back to even Jaredite times, these chasquis. Now, originally they thought all these chasquis were colored knots that indicated information about accounting. Now, I'm a CPA and I can't interpret those, but now Professor Gary Horton at Harvard University believes that this is not the case. These were actually their books and their written records. And when the Spanish came, they knew that some of these chasquis were being used, they were considered to be sacred, and so the Spanish burned all of them. Okay, so it's very interesting. Again, it states that in the Book of Mormon that whatsoever things were written upon anything save it be upon the plates must perish and vanish away. Now, the Book of Mormon has animals in it, right? We got horses, asses, sheep, goats, wild goats, swine, cattle, and elephants. That's a pretty large group of animals that were part of the civilization of the Nephites. And so, people in Nephi did till the land, and they raised all manner of grain and fruits and flocks and herds and cattle and all kinds of wild goats and horses, etc. Okay, we all know that. Well, if you look at the Book of Mormon, you have a pretty good description that they were herdsmen. The word herds is used 23 times in the Book of Mormon. Sheep are mentioned 24 times, shepherds 17 times, and flocks are mentioned 63 times. Okay, now if you go north of Panama, there's absolutely no archaeological record of any such animals having lived or been domesticated. The only domesticated animals that were found in Mesoamerica were dogs, turkeys, and ducks, and I think rabbits. And the dogs were used not as pets, they were used for food. Okay. Of course, the Lord came and talked about his other sheep that are now of this fold, and he also must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. Well, that would have been pretty hard for the people to imagine what he was talking about if it was in North Dakota. Okay, there's simply no sheep there, no domesticated herds. When the Spanish came, as one quoted, there are many herds of sheep which go about in flocks, and their shepherds who watch over them and keep them away from the sown fields. When they got there, there was one person alone on the Altiplano who had over 40,000 sheep. So what are we talking about here? Well, it's very well known that some people, when they go from one place to another place, they find animals that remind them of animals back home that they use the same names. So what you have here is when Nephi is describing a horse, or the Jaredites are describing a horse, I believe they're talking about a pack animal, something that could carry weight, a beast of burden. So when the Spanish came, the Incas thought that the horses were simply large llamas because they used them for similar reasons, for packing animals. So that could be one explanation of what the horse is the llama. And of course, it mentions chariots as well, right? Now back here, what the Spanish were talking about when they talked about sheep, the Incas having sheep, they were talking about alpacas. Now, they even said that the alpaca had finer wool than their sheep back in Spain. They said that the alpaca had better meat than the lambs they had back in Spain. Now, they were totally wrong. An alpaca is not a sheep, but it looks like one. It might taste something like one, and it has fantastic wool. But an alpaca is actually a camel from the camel family. Okay, they had chariots. You can see people in Peru to this day who put the llama onto a cart and carry it around. Wild goats, you have vicuñas. Okay, again, a similar animal that we think would be a wild goat, the vicuña. Now, if you look at the Noel Webster's 1828 American Usage Dictionary under the word cattle, what did the cattle mean to Joseph Smith? In its primary sense, the word includes camels, horses, asses, a variety of domesticated horned beasts of the bovine genus, sheep of all kinds, and goats. So clearly, they had cattle in South America. Now, it talks about elephants, and this might be a far stretch, but Nephi never saw an elephant in his life. Okay, there were no elephants in the Middle East at that time. No one had seen one. The Greeks called, and Greek was the culture of the time when Nephi and Lehi left Jerusalem. That was a prevailing culture. The Greeks called any animal that had a tusk an elephant. That's where it came from. The word elephant comes from the tusk. So this is the peccary, which is in South America. It's also in Central America, but it has tusk. It would have been, in the Greek language, it would have been considered an elephant. The people in the Book of Mormon, the Nephites, wore costly apparel. Now, the weavers of the ancient Peruvians are considered the greatest weavers in the world during their era. The royals had cloth made with gold thread, incorporated feathers. They even had robes for the Inca that were made out of bat skin or bat fur. So they were very excellent weavers. And when they uncover the tombs there, they still find fantastic textiles that have bright colors still in them. So certainly they weren't running around in G-strings. They wore the Nephite armor was made with thick clothing. When the Spanish arrived, the Incas, their shields were made with 3 layers of knotted fabric. In fact, they were so light and effective, you couldn't put a sword through them, that the Spanish threw down their armor and they used the Incas' armor because it was much lighter and just as effective. So it's a direct thing from Alma here. Oops, spelled wrong. They had highways. The Inca highways were truly highways. They go up to 15,000 feet above sea level through the Andes. There's 2,500 miles of highways that the Incas built, larger than the Roman highway system. Some of the highways there incorporated cement. The Golden Temple, okay? We read about King Noah having a golden chair and everything being put together in fine wood and gold and all these different materials. Well, when the Spanish got to Cusco, there were golden chairs inside the temple in Cusco. In fact, the whole side of the Coricancha temple in Cusco, the whole wall of the temple was laden in gold plates, pure gold plates. So when the sun hit, it reminded them of the glory of their God, their white God. Okay, the Book of Mormon talks about growing barley and then other words that we don't have words for today. But the Incas grew quechua, which is very popular today, but wasn't 30 years ago. But it's the highest protein grain in the world. They had corn, they had barley, they had potatoes, and they have sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes being interesting because a lot of people, they know that the sweet potato came from South America and ended up in Polynesia. How did that happen? Well, there's a possible Book of Mormon connection there as well. The Nephites made wine. Okay, now how could they make wine? They didn't have grapes. There is a variety of wild grape there, but it's not anything you could make wine from. But there is this saco, which is this one here, which they made wine from. It's kind of like a big bush, and it has things that look like a grape. And this is something that also grows in Peru. It's called the Brazilian grape tree. And these things, they taste something like a grape, and they can make wine out of them. And the Incas actually made wine out of both these two things. Now the lore, the maritime lore, it's very odd that you can go from Mesopotamia, and you see this is a drawing of a Mesopotamian ship from the Bahrain Museum, okay, and this is a reed ship on Lake Titicaca. Now we know that Thor Heyerdahl spent a lot of time doing research on this, and when he built the Ra, he tried to sail it from Africa all the way over to South America or the Caribbean. And the first time he tried it, his boat sank. It was so poorly built. So the second time he went to Bolivia and got Bolivian boat builders to go and make a reed boat. And of course, that one was successful in coming across the Atlantic. But even as much as the animal heads on the end of it and so forth, it's amazing the similarities. Okay, people do not change their numeric systems very often. It's very odd. Look at America. We're still on inches and feet when the rest of the world is metric. Okay, the Egyptians and Hebrews used a system of 10, as did the Andean people. They used a system of 10. The other nations in the major nations in the Americas did not. Okay, they used a different numeric system. Now let's look at the geography for a second. This is what the world looked like to the Incas. They didn't have a, perceptive concept of their empire being anywhere else but right there in South America, going from Colombia all the way down to Chile. But the Inca Empire was divided into 4 quarters, as was the people in the Book of Mormon. They had a Northland and they had a Southland. The 2 northern quarters and the 2 southern quarters, again, similar to what the Book of Mormon geography was. Now, this is all, of course, my speculation. In my book, I explain why I believe certain places were Book of Mormon sites. But again, I've not had the resources to spend a lot of time in Peru. Okay, most of my things been done in libraries. So, except for my mission, of course. But you have Corral. This is Corral. It's made up of 16 different pyramids. It was mostly a religious center, and there are 25 different cities around it. Now that goes back to the Jaredite times. When the brother Jared left, they left Mesopotamia, they left Shinar. They were told, they would be promised that they would be the greatest nation on earth. And indeed, Sumer was not as big as Corral. Corral became bigger, the biggest empire in the world to this day. Now, Lima, Peru, if you go to Lima, Peru, the Incas actually called that area, the Rimac Valley, they called it the land of the people of desolation. That was its name, its very name, the land of the people of desolation. Now, I speculate that the Uran Valley, just south of Lima, was a narrow neck of land, and I'll describe that later. Okay. Cusco, being the city of Nephi, Bukhara, the northern side of Lake Titicaca, being Zarahemla, the Nazca, being Bountiful. This is what Nazca looked like. in the Book of Mormon times. And Tambo Viejo as being the city of Mulek. I have no other places I've had a chance to identify, but those are my speculations on sites, possible candidates for Book of Mormon sites. Now, everybody says, well, where are the 4 seas in the Book of Mormon? Well, you have the West Sea being the Pacific, the South Sea being Lake Titicaca, 130 miles long, a massive lake. You have Lake or Polpau down here. It's a salt lake, being the southern lake. That lake is 100 times, and its salt fields, 100 times the size of the Great Salt Lake. And you have up here in the north, you have Lake Curlin, which Quechua's name, Chinche Cocha, which actually means the North Sea. Now, in Quechua, the word Concha stands for an ocean and a lake. Just like in Hebrew, you have the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and you have the Mediterranean Sea, all using the word sea. In Quechua, Concha stands for sea and it stands for ocean. Now, this is, again, it's very interesting because this lake up here, it's the second largest lake in Peru, is actually called the North Sea. So if you put in Lake Huron in your Wikipedia, you actually see the Quechua definition, Northern Sea. So that's the 4 seas of the Incas. There were the 4 conchas of the Incas. Whether the same with the Book of Mormon, well, who knows? Now, everyone's going to say, where's the narrow neck of land? Now, there's a archaeologist, Richard Hawk, who's wrote a book called Deciphering the Geography of the Book of Mormon. Now, he actually, when he wrote the book, he believes that, he probably still does, believes that the Book of Mormon took place in Mesoamerica. But he makes a pretty interesting statement. The West Sea is clearly evident in the description given in the text, but the East Sea is never specifically mentioned as being associated with the narrow corridor. Since the 2 bodies of water flanking a narrow strip of land create an isthmus, the narrow neck of land as described in the Book of Mormon does not qualify as an isthmus. In other words, there's no 2 seas mentioned. What's mentioned is the narrow neck of land went from the sea on the west to the east. Okay. Now, the Oxford Quechua Dictionary, Anti means east. Okay. That is where the Andes receive their name. The Andes is the east. I even talked to a Peruvian the other day, and I said, I was trying to describe this to him. He says, yeah, we don't talk about east and west. We have north and south, but we talk about ocean, mountains. Ocean, mountains, because the Andes run north-south. So they're on the east. And that's where the name comes from. Andes comes from anti. So anti means east. So in the Book of Mormon, you have Antioman means it was east of Zarahemla. Okay, so the Incas called the area, again, the Incas called the area of Lima, the land of the people of desolation. Okay, what do we know about the narrow neck of land? Well, it was a distance of a day and a half journey by a Nephite. It was on the line between Bountiful and the land of desolation, and from the east to the West Sea. So if we look here at the Urin Valley, this is the land of desolation. This is Lima. Okay, land of desolation was separated by the narrow neck of land, separated the north from the south. There's a very narrow canyon. It's very narrow. Even kind of looks like a lake, like a neck, I should say. This was a primary Inca road. Okay, it separated 2 of their quarters. This road led to Cusco, to the capital. There's another one that came up from the south along the shoreline. And Moroni told his army to fortify the narrow neck of land so that the Lamanites could not attack them from both directions. This corridor here has the Inca Highway. It was guarded. It had a wall that protected it. It was the height of a man. And there's a wall that runs completely from these foothills all the way down to the coast. This was extremely fortified area. Again, the land of desolation. And that's my theory about that. Now, if you'd like to know more, because I'm just going over a lot of stuff here without giving any citations whatsoever. If you'd like to know more about the possibility of Peru being a Book of Mormon site, I recommend my 2 books, Nephi and the Promised Land and Discovering the Amazing Jaredites. Between those, you have 900 non-LDS citations. Another good book to read is 1491, The Americas Before Columbus by Charles Mann, and where he takes all the kind of archaeology that's been coming forth in the last 2 decades and makes it concise. So he talks about all the Americas. He talks about North America, he talks about Mesoamerica, and he talks about South America. It's a very good book, very easy to read, but it's a scholastic level. And then there's a book I just came across, Waka Wazan Viracocha, The House of the Lord. It's written by a guy named Van Evans. He's a PhD, but a psychologist. He was a missionary down in Peru. And he went down there and studied all the curaderos and all their traditions. And he looked at their traditions of their temple ceremonies and compares those to some of the things that were revealed by Joseph Smith. It's a very interesting book, quite speculative, but I find it very interesting. So thank you very much. My website is nephiproject.com. It's where we have our 13 films and our books are all there. And if you want to just talk to me or order something, you can do it directly from me through follownephi@yahoo.com. So I want to now stop sharing and say, I hope you found that interesting.
It was extremely interesting, and we really appreciate you presenting it.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. You have some questions about it, like don't ask me where it took place. Where's the Book of Mormon take place? I don't know. In fact, if we knew, it would be no fun, right?
I don't even worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. The book's true, right?
Yep.
It's the doctrine that's important, right?
Yeah, I'm really apologetic. I'm not.
Okay. It's okay, Monte. Yeah.
Ronnie, be done to unmute.
Yeah.
It was probably more than one place.
What's that?
I said the Book of Mormon took place in probably more than one place.
Actually, I agree that the people migrated. It says even the Jaredites, they went to the land south looking for food. They went to the land north and found food north. Where was that? They went to different places. They didn't stay in one place. That's one of the things that archaeologists are finding in Arabia. They're finding out that they were building ships back to 300 BC. They were traveling the Indian Ocean in great boats 2000 BC. They were sitting around. And, in the ancient world, people were migrating. The current theory now is that the mother civilization of the Americas is in the Andes, and it went north and influenced Mesoamerica and Northern America. But maybe in another 30 years, they'll find out more archaeology in North America and they'll reverse themselves again. It used to be the Olmecs that became the Incas or the Andeans. Who knows? There's so much out there to still know. But I agree, it could have taken place in more than one place. Yeah.
I like the idea that the first submersible vessels were created by the Jaredites.
Well, yeah. I kind of, I don't believe they're submersibles. Okay.
Oh, for a short period of time.
Well, it's if you come with me to Oman, I'd love to have you all come with me because you're going to meet some wonderful people and see some sites. You go, oh my gosh, Joseph Smith could have known any of this stuff. I mean, it's incredible. But, and there's a museum there, a maritime museum, and they have an example of a ship, okay, that they discovered. So the Mesopotamians had river barges made of reed ships. But when they went into the Indian Ocean, they traveled out into rough seas, they created a different kind of boat. And what's fascinating, I describe this in the very much in The Amazing Jaredites, Discovering the Amazing Jaredites. This boat had 4 layers. So it had an open hole. It had an open hole. The hole was made of tying together the reeds really tight, okay, and building a kind of a wall with them. And then they just had some wood timbers to support the hole, okay? Then they took mats, and they took reed mats, and they put them around the hole. Then they covered them with tar, pitchum. And it says the Jaredites used pitchum, right? Like Noah. They sealed it like Noah, and Noah used pitchum. Then what was really curious, I found, is that what they would do is they would cover the whole hole, the deck and everything, with mud. I thought, what good's that? Well, apparently when you put the mud and you bake it in the sun, the salt inside the mud tightens it and makes it waterproof. Okay, like in the Book of Mormon. So picture a hole, okay, with covered with mud. It's going to look like a dish. And it's pointed at both ends, this ship, but it's going to look like a dish because the dishes back then were what? They were just earthenware. They weren't porcelain from China, you know, or Denmark. They were just earthware. So it'll look like a dish. Because it's made out of reeds, it floats very lightly like a bird on the surface. If a wave crashes over it, the water's going to wash right off of it. Now, the problem is, okay, they need light, they need air, right? Now, the Jaredite barges, or the Mesopotamian barges had a cabin on them. So there's a hole and they had a cabin. Now, it makes sense to me that when they talked about they were tight like a dish, they couldn't breathe, Lord says, well, make a hole in the cabin for the people and a hole on the bottom, which is the deck, like a hatch, you know, on a ship. You had to have a hatch so you can breathe. And when the water comes in, close the hatch when you're in high waves. It says the waves will roll over you and you'll be like a whale. The water will wash off your back.
That's what I meant by submersible.
Yeah, it was watertight. I think too that they were light and they could land them. So I don't know exactly the route they took, but it took them 344 days. So I think they would actually, they're light enough they could land them during the daytime. At nighttime, they'd come ashore.
Is
Where they
pitchum anything like modern day oakum?
If you
What's that?
consider-
Is pitchum anything like modern day oakum?
Pitch is probably tar in the Middle East. Because there's lots of places there where you can see oil just coming out of the earth.
Okay,
So that was probably the pitch. I don't know. You know, I don't know. It's like,
that's what they used to
I
keep up.
just come up with the best ideas I can at the time.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting. It was tight like Noah's boats.
If you
If
can,
you consider the route to be east from Arabia across the Pacific Ocean, if you follow the currents and winds of the Pacific Ocean, it would be almost impossible to land in Mesoamerica. You would land in Peru,
That's right.
which I was a little surprised you didn't add in there. But another comment, I am intrigued because the human population is brown, varying from a very, very dark brown to a very, very light brown. And we talk about the white god. To have a white man almost has to come from Northern Europe. And so I'm a little inclined to think that the whole thing about white gods comes out of the European influence into the area rather than what was actually there, because the the Middle Eastern would have been brown, all of them, not white and black.
Okay, I'm not an expert on that. That's obviously that could be. One thing you have to consider though is that when the Spanish arrived, the Incas, I have this theory, okay, and it's, it's just a theory, right? That because archaeology, they show that people were living in South America 40 BC. I believe that when the four brothers got there, they were met with people who were already living there. They were not in an isolated place. They were among people. And they became the Inca royal line. And that not all the Incas were killed off, or all the Nephites were killed off. They became the later Incas. When the Spanish got there, the Incas, they said, were whiter and taller than the Spanish. There's a book called The Warriors of the Clouds, the Chacapoyas, and they were a tribe that were on the Incas could never conquer them. They were on the east side of the Andes, and they're known for their white skin, their fair skin. And the Incas would try to negotiate for their daughters because they're so beautiful. So I don't know. I mean, that's really interesting, the idea. But also, when I go to Arabia, it's kind of interesting. In Arabia, they'll say, we're white people. I go, what do you mean you're white people? You look dark to me. And they go, well, Jesus was from Jerusalem. He wasn't Scandinavian. And we're just bleached, what we are. But the Arabs think they're white people. Oh, we're fair skinned. The dark people, those are the Arabs from Sudan and from Somalia. We're fair skinned. We're white people. So I don't know. That's an interesting thought, though.
The bell rang to indicate the end of our class, and so I would call that to your attention, but invite the rest of the questions. Ron's had his finger up for a question, and I'm still sitting here patiently waiting for my opportunity. But the fact is that Robert may very well be turning off the recorder at this stage and miss many of these fascinating last questions. Go ahead, Ron, you need to get in there.
Yeah, well,